set the stage here just for the viewers to kind of introduce the conversation. So Don Murphy, you are the producer of critical hits, commercial hits, the Transformers franchise, Natural Born Killers, so many films, but you started out by writing and directing a movie in the late 80s called Monday Morning. And how in the world did you, I know you were at USC. First of all, I'm kind of curious what brought you to USC. You're a movie fan, right? Everything I've read about you is that you just love movies. Was that like a destination for you?
Well, the short answer is that while on the way to Georgetown Law, I had fortunately an epiphany which said that maybe you should try the movie business. And so I didn't know how to do it back then. And so I decided that I would treat it just like going to law school. I got to thank Leonard Maltin for a lot of things one day, but besides all of his other books, including the Big Giant Bible, that one year, Leonard had a Leonard Maltin Guide to Film Schools. So I picked it up and there was like 50 film schools. And I figured if I was gonna go, I should probably try for the best. So I hurriedly took the tests and I hurriedly looked up the top 3 and applied. And the top 3 then as now are pretty much the same: SC, CLA, NYU. And was very disappointed, like almost immediately rejected by NYU and then rejected by UCLA. But supposedly number 1 at the last minute said, yeah, come on over. So that kind of worked out well.
So the path that you were on was writer director. Like you weren't there for producing, right? You wanted to be a director.
I don't think anyone goes to the SC graduate school except to become, the next hot, well, back then anyway, except to become the next writer director. That's what everybody, I mean, that's what you did. So, okay, that's what I'm going to do.
So this is essentially your thesis, right? This was your
yeah.
thesis.
So what had happened was there was I'm trying to remember all the numbers. 380. There was a 483. I can't remember what the number was for the intermediate class. Maybe it was a 320, but there was a 480 was like the class that everybody wanted to be in. And if you were going for your MA, every semester they chose 5 movies. They were 20 minutes sync sound, 16 millimeter. And you got to use all the school's equipment and all the equipment you could get from outside the school and all the crews. But my intermediate year, I produced somebody's 480. It was a cool kind of take on Jonathan Swift. And almost as if you were watching a modern day current affair, but with, it was all about like, hey, I know how to deal with overpopulation. Let's turn all juvenile delinquents into like lard. So, and there was a 20-minute sync sound film and I produced it and I figured out how to work every angle, how to use the crews, how to do everything. And, but I didn't like the odds. The odds were if you did everything right, if you obeyed all the teachers, if you played every rule, you might get one of the 5 480s, you might. And then if it was any good, and sometimes they were good. I remember Steve Summers did a really good one. There was this other one that a kid did who was fantastic called The Pool Dweller. So, Jay Roach did a really good one. Most of the time they weren't good. So you had to get lucky enough to get a 480. It had to be really good. And then you had to have like a script under your arm somebody wanted. And then you were anointed. Well, I didn't like all those ifs. So I quickly figured out that if I shifted the actual degree goal from an MA to an MFA, well, now you get modulated by the same teachers. You don't have to be in such a rigid situation, but you can still get all the crews, say supported by, it was still a USC film. It was still everything that a 480 was, except like it didn't have to be 20 minutes. It could be whatever you wanted it to be. So at that point, I started thinking, well, the amount of work to do the 20-minute film was a lot. The amount to do a 90-minute film would be 4+ times that. But at the end of the film time, you'd have a film. And so you'd at least have a film that you could sell, that you could distribute, that you could get out there. And so I quickly started working towards that goal.
Where did the idea, I don't want to spoil the movie for anyone that hasn't seen it. If you haven't seen it, you got to check this out. Buy this, watch this. But it's school violence. I mean, you've got there are a lot of things here that will become much more topical later. But I'm just curious where the story came from.
Well, the original story, and there was so now I want to write and direct this. So I need a producer. And fortunately, I'm the TA teaching assistant for the Peter Stark program, which is still there. That's 20 students a year that get admitted to be producers. Although since I left, a lot of people ended up, Goffin, Millar, John August started it being screenwriters, but it was really a production program set up in memory of Ray Stark's kid who jumped out. Ray Stark was a famous producer of the 70s and 80s, and his kid jumped out of a building. And so he funded this endowment at school. I was a teaching assistant. So now if I'm going to be the writer director, that's going to be the salvation of cinema, I'm going to need a producer. So I ended up with this guy in my class named Greg Scanlon. And I said, what I want to do, by that point, John Hughes was all the rage. And what I want to do is something like The Breakfast Club, where everything's kind of in a room. Because again, if you're going to do a lower budgeted film, you have less days, you have less locations. If you're a film student, the ultimate low budget film would be something along the lines of 12 Angry Men, right? Because it's 12 people in a jury box, right? Jury room. So I suggested the Breakfast Club with guns, right? So instead of like, I forget how many people in that movie, 5, 6 people doing the detention, nobody's going anywhere. And that's it, right? And he said, okay, go write that. And so I went out and I wrote that. And, obviously when you're younger, you're a lot angrier. So it was a much more angry screenplay. And it's not what's in the movie that you have. It started out like, the kid comes in, puts 2 in the teacher, the school empties out, the class stays, and he's like, now let's do some show and tell. And it was, it was intense. It was again, that was the pitch, Breakfast Club with guns. And as the date that I knew, so now I've transferred this into my thesis film. This is going to be I'm no longer an MA, I'm going to get an MFA. This is going to be my thesis film. We promoted it as the first feature in USC history. If you asked me, was that true? I wasn't sure that was true at the time, but nobody ever corrected me. So maybe it was. And I knew that there was a hard out. If we didn't start by this date, it would never start. And the way my brain always thinks is, you got to at least try this. I mean, if you don't make it all the way through, or if you don't want, you got to at least try this. Meanwhile, Greg, the guy I had chosen to produce it, kept wanting rewrites after rewrites. And, you quickly, I didn't know what a producer really did at that point in my life, but you quickly want to please, I need him, at least I think I do. So I'm going to do what he wants. And what he wanted was to keep toning it back and forward. So, well, what if he didn't shoot the teacher right out of the door? What if actually it's all an accident? I mean, we're ruining the story, but whatever. What if it's all an accident? What if you're blaming it on like one of those kids from The Outsiders? What if the guy who's taking the class hostage, you actually don't want him to be shot? So that was Greg pushing me into like 20 rewrites to do this. And me doing it up until the point when it was like number 21.
Yeah.
And it's like, you really actually don't want to actually get off your ass and do this, do you? Because I'm explaining to you, like, if we don't start by this date, because also that was one of the things we had figured out that, I think we shot 4 weeks and we needed a free school.
Mm-hmm.
And the school we had on mind, which was the one we used, was not far from here, San Marino, just past Pasadena. And the only way you're going to get a school for 4 weeks is August. And so if we're not prepping by June, we're not going to get to school by August. This isn't going to happen because I'm not going to stay in school forever. So I eventually told Greg, I'm sorry this didn't work out. I don't know what else to do. You don't really want to do this. And I had been referred to a woman who gets a really nice credit on the movie. She gets a producer credit, well-deserved, a woman named Sheila Lightfoot, who had just done kind of what I did at USC, but at UCLA, a small film. And I sat her down and I said, hey, look, we've already lined up these 10 things that we can do for free. There's probably another 20 things that you need to line up. I need you to line this up. We've got 2/3 of the crew. This guy's not going to do it. This guy, will you produce it? And fortunately for me, she said yes and took it over. And then it became a very intensive summer of trying to do it. But to answer your question, that's where this came from. It was, how do you do a movie for no money? How do you do it in a limited location? How do you make it seem like you've got the amount of spam this thing gets? How do you get some drama out of it?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, to some extent, I have no idea what would have happened had I made the Columbine version 10 years before there was Columbine. I'm happy that Greg had me write it 21 times because it ended up being the movie that it is. It also is a good lesson at a certain point. If your instinct is telling you the person doesn't really want to do it, the person probably doesn't really want to do it.
Yeah. Well, that story makes me wonder. I mean, you are the guy, you're one of the producers of Natural Born Killers, which pushed all sorts of boundaries. Is there part of you that wonders what would have happened if you'd made the harder version of the movie with the more extreme violence?
Well, I think everybody, no, well, because for a long time, Quentin was a friend, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely the version of like everybody that went to USC during my era all wanted to come out being anointed the next, Grand Poobah.
Right.
Oddly enough, guy who was my friend ended up being the biggest anointing of my lifetime, Quentin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do I wonder, had I made the violent version, would I have had the anointing 3 years? How many years? 3 years before Reservoir Dogs? I can't really, I have no idea. I think the movie showed me that my skills really were in producing more than anything else. And that's what I ended up pivoting to.
Well, it's well directed and it's well scripted as well. And you've got all sorts of research. Like if I didn't know this was a first film, I would not believe it. Because there's dolly shots, there's tracking shots. It looks like you got a crane shot or two in there too. I don't know exactly what the setup for it was, but it's very well done. From my understanding, you had a lot of equipment that you were able to get, and you had you shot on 35, right?
We shot on 35. We got all the negative donated by AGFA, which was I think it was a French company. At the time, you could get Kodak, you could get Photochem, and you could get AGFA. So we went to AGFA. We got all the cameras from Panavision. So we had Panavision cameras. The crew was all the top people in the cinematography class, and the production department was real people that were, all these people were able to immediately have this feature on their reel, which was good for them. I'm flattered by your kind words. Thank you. It's Photochem, which is still around, donated the developing until they threatened to sue me at one point, which was charming as a film student. But Yeah, there was a couple of crane shots. We had that for like 2 days, and we had dollies. I mean, we had the school equipment. It's a weird time. I could tell you millions of stories. Like, you had to get the school equipment from the stock room, which was run by this crazy dude named Aziz Ghazal, who eventually I brought in to meet Oliver to do a movie version of the worst Johnny Depp film ever that eventually got made, called The Brave. But in between me bringing Aziz Ghazal in to meet Oliver and The Brave getting made, Aziz Ghazal burned down the house with his wife and daughter in it and ended up shooting himself. So, but you had to kiss Aziz Ghazal's ass in order to get the dolly equipment. So, I mean, it was, the crazy 80s were a different time than we're living in now, put it that way.
Well, that's what. On that note, I'm curious. I want to talk more about the movie, but I'm curious the way you say that, like the 80s were a different time. Could that movie even could the movie we're talking, could Monday Morning, could it be made now? Or is it
No,
too
but then I don't
controversial?
think, Natural Born Killers or Permanent Midnight or Bully or some of my other films could get made now either. No.
Yeah, that's kind of upsetting because I came of age, with the movies that you were making. I'm in my 40s, and it was those Tarantino movies, and it was Natural Born Killers, and it was that stuff that was like that new revolution. And I was going to ask you about that. Like, did that go away, and is it ever coming back? What do you think?
Well, I don't know about coming back. I mean, it definitely went away. I was just telling somebody this morning, Hollywood's never really been racist, misogynist, any of that shit. Hollywood always just wants money.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as it was just straight white guys, nobody cared because they were making money, right?
Mm-hmm.
They only bring I don't know that anybody knew Harvey was a 90-time rapist, but everybody knew Harvey was garbage. Nobody cared. And then the moment he stopped making money, everybody goes in on Harvey. So, Hollywood's always chased the money. And right now, the mid-level movies all tend to be streamers. And the streamers all want, movies that can play on your app. I mean, I can't wait to see, I love Andrew. I can't wait to see what Andrew did with Blonde. But like that's going to be incredibly controversial because that wasn't really what they signed up for, I don't think, at Netflix. So, I mean, things change, moods change, but it's telling. When I knew Quentin, he planned on modeling himself on Bogdanovich, and he did. He's like the last celebrity director. It's telling that, when did that come out at Sundance? 92, 3?
I think it was 92.
He hasn't. There's been directors that you can point to. Oh, there's Edgar. Oh, there's Eli. Oh, there's, there's probably 50 directors that you and I could point to. But like, as far as the celebrity director, Quentin's probably the last one I can point to, right? Because it's really hard it's really hard enough to get your film through the swamp, through the mass. And then it's really hard to get you as the auteur of your film out there. It's funny. He was planning it long before he got his chance to do it, but it worked for him.
One of the things I wanted to touch on was you were championing comics and there was the Christopher Reeve Superman movie, and comics have been around on the screen for a long time, but you worked in a comic book store, did you not? You were
yes. In Georgetown.
Yeah, you were championing Frank Miller. You were championing, a lot of this stuff.
No, I mean, I still remember he was like a kid in a punk rock band in DC. I still remember Steve Niles, if you know who that is, the horror comic writer who did 30 Days of Night. He was like 15 and he came into the store. He still tells the story. And I'm like, okay, so you need Swamp Thing number 21 and you need this and you need that. And, it was pretty clear when I was working in the store that, change was coming. Mm-hmm. Dark Knight wouldn't come for a little while, but the Alan Moore Swamp Things came while I was still in the store.
Mm-hmm. And you were instrumental in bringing Alan Moore properties to the screen, which is
so it just, even before CGI, it just seemed to me I wanted to make movies that I wanted to see, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was a guy running around Hollywood. It's hard to believe now. Before Kevin, before Harvey, there was a guy running around Hollywood with Stan named Joe Calamari, Joe Squid. And in the early 90s, you know, if you gave him a cheeseburger, you could get an option on a Marvel property. The only one that wasn't available was, well, it was a combination. The legendary story where Corman did his cheap Fantastic Four, which tied up Fantastic Four and Silver Surfer for 100 years. But apart from that, you could, you know, get any Marvel property for a cheeseburger. And so when I was working closely with Oliver during Natural Born Killers, we tried to get my ex-partner and I, we tried to get Oliver excited, and we got options on Elektra Assassin, which really went nowhere, sadly, and The Incredible She-Hulk, which we set up as a TV show back, we're talking like 95, 4, with Corey Everson, who was a wrestler. She's in Natural Born Killers in the Mickey and Mallory TV movie sequence. It's a punk rock, because he's anything but a punk rock Mark Harmon, and Corey Everson as the TV Mickey and Mallory. So, you know, and I still remember we were shooting, it can't be Natural Born Killers because that's a long time ago. Maybe we were shooting Apt Pupil when this guy calls me up and it's like, I'm Avi Arad. Joe Squid is, it was like some mafia thing. Joe Calamari's out. And like, I've taken over and I want to talk to you about Elektra Assassin. And I'm like, well, you know, am I going to get whacked here? And then became really close to Avi and Kevin, and, you know, tried a few other things with them. We had set up Iron Man with Tom Cruise actually at New Line, but we could never get past the fact that sometimes Bob Shea, who owned New Line, sometimes he would wake up and he would actually show up in a meeting, and you got random comments like, Pepper Potts, you know, that's something we used to eat in the Army. Well, you know, there's no way that he should ever fly. Have you read this? And so, you know, we spent a lot of time developing that character, but never had a chance, and we lost it. And then 6 months later, the Marvel Universe happened.
Well, you brought a lot of stuff to screen yourself. From Hell is a great one. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, you brought that to screen before.
Well, what happened with From Hell is fascinating because the first 3 issues of it came out from Kitchen Sink. Steve Bissett had started From Hell. From Hell started in Taboo, and it was a part of a longer anthology. And I read it, and I knew Alan Moore from, you know, Swamp Thing. So I knew Alan Moore was like the greatest, but I read the first 6 chapters and I thought like, okay, this is cool. I have no idea what this is, but this is cool. Then they did the first 3 issues, and all of a sudden you got the appendix. And I don't think I've ever seen that before or since. There's like 8 pages of footnotes telling me what I just read, giving me a historical context, you know, blah, blah. And it was like, oh, come to Papa. And that was when I immediately, I mean, this is also lost to some of my history, but it was like, at that point, immediately got Touchstone to option it for me. Touchstone, of course, being owned by Disney. So the Variety had a funny headline about Snow White and Jack the Ripper. But yeah, we bought From Hell 4 years before he ever actually finished it. And then when I got to meet Alan a few times, one of the best times was at the Groucho Club. And is there anything else you're working on? And he's like, well, there's this public domain, these characters. And I had him, he sent me like a 6-page treatment of League. And I guess he just got fired from Fox, but my dear friend Peter Rice, but got fired from Disney. My dear friend Peter Rice was an upcoming executive at the time at Fox. He was English, and I'm like, do you want to see these 8 pages? And like, so before there were like 2 years before there was even our first issue, we were developing the movie at Fox, which was good for everyone. I mean, the only reason Alan controls that title is because he didn't sell the rights to Jim Lee in some quick fire sale. It was not so good because, say what you will about the movie has very little to do with the comics. Right. Primarily because we started to develop it before there even was a comic. So anyway.
Your fandom really comes through, and that's one of the things that I enjoy about you, is that you are so pure in your passion in the fandom, and you genuinely love this stuff. Or if you, even if it's something that you don't necessarily personally have a connection with, you see the appeal. I've heard your story about Double Dragon. You know, you were playing the game, and you're like, well, there's a story here, there's a structure here. One of the first video game movies that we ever got, and it's because of your vision. And I just think that's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm more surprised by the fact that I've met a bunch of people who grew up on the video and like the movie. I'm like, you do? Okay.
And then, you know, we talk about the Transformers movies. Those people need to remember, those predate the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's 2007, if memory serves. That's before all this stuff. That was, again, sort of ahead of this curve, this landscape where we're living now, where there's so many comic book properties and cartoon properties and nostalgia properties. But you had your finger on the pulse of that. And
Well, it was funny. What had happened was my partner Susan and I have been going to Comic-Con since like 1990. And one year they opened up a new wing. Now it's just a new wing, still there, huge space. But they had put in this new wing Hasbro, which had Transformers and G.I. Joe, and whoever the hell owns Voltron, and Mattel with He-Man. And I'm walking around and I'm slightly confused why all these titles are being pushed. Because you have to understand, in the 80s, I was at Georgetown. I wasn't watching this stuff. And then about an hour later, as we're walking around, it's like, no, but if I was a kid in the 80s, if I was a latchkey kid, and now I'm grown up and I've got my own kids, then this is like my nostalgia. Mm-hmm. And that was when I started to look into it, and it's a hell of a long story. I actually started out doing G.I. Joe. We were going to do G.I. Joe right. We signed a deal with Sony. George Bush invaded Iraq. They didn't want to go near G.I. Joe. It's not like that. They didn't want to go near G.I. Joe. And that was when the woman who handled Hasbro Films said, what about Transformers? And I was like, that could work. And still had friends from League at ILM. And one of them did a rough demo to show that it could be done. And then, you know, it was off to the races. But even then, that got turned down by the head of every studio. You know, first it was Sanford over its new Regency, then it was a guy over at Paramount, and then finally Mike DeLuca, who's now taking over Warner Brothers, but Mike DeLuca called and said, so I brought it to Steven, and he's really excited. And I'm like, Steven? And then, you know, next thing you know, we made it. So who knows? I mean, I knew it was a good idea. I think even at the time, I just figured if we could do the first one, you know, maybe what, you know, if we got the first one right, maybe we'll get to do a second one. Mm-hmm. And in the first one, the fans were really upset because there wasn't a lot of fan service. And I just figured, well, if we get the first one right, maybe we'll make a second one and then we could do more fan service. But I mean, the first one was so huge. At that point, what are you supposed to say? Well, if only you listened to me, man. So, you know.
G.I. Joe, I would love to have seen what would have happened if you could have gotten a hold of G.I. Joe, because, you know, the crossover between those two audiences is huge.
Oh, I know. There's been talk about doing that, but Brian, the main guy who started with us, the head of, he died suddenly a few months ago from Hasbro, Brian Goldner. So, I mean, it's, you know, we'll see what happens. I think people are going to be really pleasantly surprised by the Rise of the Beasts, and then the animation is really what you're talking about, more of a Cybertron, and that takes us till 2024. So
it's like the seventh one, isn't it? I think that's the
seventh one is going to be Rise of the Beasts,
right? Yeah,
and then the animated one is going to be the eighth one.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, I could talk to you all day, but I'm going to wind us down here. Do you miss, you know, we started with Monday morning. Do you miss that you didn't direct more than one movie? Do you have more stories that you wish you'd told yourself?
No, with my partner Susan, we are working on two different screenplays, and you know, maybe we'll finish them and maybe we'll get them made. But I think what Monday morning showed me was that my brain was more functional with like 20 plates spinning, as opposed to zeroing in on one story for 2 or 3 years and just doing that. I don't think I have the directorial brain. Now that I've worked with, you know, everybody from, you know, Oliver Stone, Steven Spielberg, Bryan Singer, the Hughes brothers, Sean Levy, who's just the most commercial, nice guy out there right now. Now that I've worked with all these people, it's very clear it's a different skill set. And whatever the hell I've been doing for the last 28 years, that skill set works. So
thank you so much for the time that you spent with me here, and for the audience here. I want to remind everybody that Monday morning, aka Class of Fear, that's the title for the VHS tape. By the way, is this the disc debut? I know it got a VHS release, but has it had a?
Yeah, no, it was like one of these weird things. And I'm immensely flattered by your kind words. It was one of these weird things. So we got it done. We screened it at the Academy, totally sold out the Academy, which is a huge, like 1,100 seat theater. Friend of mine actually paid for it. He was a horror director, Jeff Burr. He had just finished Stepfather 2 and Chainsaw Massacre 3, and he paid for the theater, and we had a beautiful, you know, beautiful screening. And then I waited, like I said, for, you know, baby Jesus to anoint me, and you know, met with a bunch of agents. But 6 months later, I was sitting there and nothing happened, right? And so that was when my ex-partner said, you know, maybe we should become producers, and it worked, right? But that's another story that's in her book and all this other stuff. The movie came out on VHS. And that was back when VHSs cost, you know, oh my God, the spam. When VHSs cost, you know, $89, and that was when $89 was real money, right? And then, funny story, Graham King, who's now, if you actually know how his deals are structured, probably the most successful independent producer out there, Bohemian Rhapsody and Gangs of New York. Graham King had a foreign sales company. So Graham King picked up the movie, and, you know, we ended up on German TV and Italian TV. And I mean, he sold the movie internationally. And I mean, I'm not saying he sold it for trillions and trillions of dollars, but he got it out there. So like it had its life in like 1990. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I put a VHS on the shelf next to the DVDs and put the poster in my office, and then never thought of it again. And there's this company, MVD, they did the Double Dragon disc.
Right.
And one of the producers over there said, you know, I just saw your directing film. I'm like, how? He like bought a VHS on eBay, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, is it any good? And he's like, well, I'd like to put it out on Blu-ray. And I'm like, okay, well, there's all kinds of problems with that. And he's like, what? Well, I'm not sure where the negative ended up. It's been 30 years. You know, we did the VHS. I'm not sure where the negative ended up. I mean, I know where the contracts are. I know everything, but are you kidding me? And so we talked about it a lot during the pandemic. I was putting him together with like other friends' titles, like Public Access and these other movies he wanted to find. And then he said, no, we're going to do this. And I'm like, okay, I know where the only 35mm print exists. It's in my storage. And he's like, well, we could scan that, but that's going to look like shit. We need to find the negative. I'm like, dude, for all I know, this shit was, he goes, well, where'd you do your color timing? And I said, well, you know, we brought this up earlier, Photocam. And I said, but remember, they threatened to sue me and shit. Like, you know, I think I paid them off. I'm sure they're okay, but it's been like, you know, they didn't sue me, but it was like 32 years ago. Photocam had it.
Wow.
Photocam had the negative. So it's like, prove you own it here. We got the negative, and yeah, this is the debut. It had, you know, for better or worse, I mean, I think it's still, I've seen it so many times, it just feels like a student film. But the compliments I've gotten besides your kind ones are, it certainly feels like something that was made in the 80s. And, all those actors, I picked Noah. Somebody had done a student film with Noah called Not Fade Away. Or maybe it was just called Fade Away, in which Noah was a short film in which Noah was hitchhiking to go see Bruce Springsteen concert. And he meets a girl along the way. And, it was a very good version of the kind of film that USC did at the time. But I saw Noah and I'm like, that's the guy I want. That guy looks angry and shit. Which led to kind of an insane dinner at a steakhouse in the Burbank with his father. This is long before his father killed anybody. And, it was just.
By Robert Blake, right?
Yeah, Robert Blake. So there's so many different weird stories. And then Julianne had just won, like, it was an era when there were no, the Russians didn't show up, but she had won like 92 gold medals in the Olympics. And she had done a couple of horror comedies, and I liked the way she looked and I liked the way she felt. She was pretty, but not too pretty. And so the two of them looked good together. And I mean, Lisa Rinna, it was one of the first things she ever did. She came in and gave a good reading, and it was interesting to be like, however old I was, 24, doing something like this. But like you say, a long time ago.
Well, I'm glad that it made it to disc and that everybody gets to see it now. And you've also contributed to some special features here. We've only really, as deep as we've gone here, we've only really just scratched the surface. There's a 52-minute interview here with you about the making of the movie, where you talk about being homeless, basically living in Universal, which is fascinating to me. But
no, so I'm sure the funny thing is, like, what's the guy's name? He's still there. So Sheila gets us 3 editing rooms, and they're small, but this is editing rooms where you have one room had 2 moviolas. Another room has these giant reels where you're marking the reel. I mean,
yeah.
And it had 3 editing rooms. And then at a certain point, it became, my lease ended up at USC, and it became, I could go try to find a place to sleep, or I could find, to live, or I could keep the money to try to finish the damn film. Well, again, the whole idea is if I finish the film, I'll have a film. So, I say a year, it may have only been like 9 months, but there was one of the editing rooms where, you bring in your mattress and you go to sleep, and there was a racquetball court 2 blocks from Universal where you could just kind of show up and take a shower. And, you didn't want to be walking the halls in the middle of the night. So you bring a giant Slurpee cup to pee in. And, sometimes the janitor would open the door and wake you up, and you'd be like, oh, sorry, bro. Yeah, just taking a nap. And I think they eventually figured out by the end, well, that's probably on the disc. That's where Jeff Burr comes from, the guy who I just said played for the screening.
Yeah.
One night across the way, in a paid for editing room, late at night, they're finishing Stepfather 2.
Yeah.
And whatever the hell they're linked on, and I can't tell you really, it's like, it's your time. I don't even know what the hell the line is, but Terry O'Quinn is just screaming over and over again, it's your time, it's your time. And I'm coming out in like my boxes, and I'm like, I'm trying to like sleep over here. Yeah, that happened. It was a weird time. I could probably place it because just to make things even more dangerous, some random mental patient drove up to the security gate right by that editing room and shot the security guard dead. Like, just hi. So it's probably like 89, 90 that happened. Yeah. Oh, the stories, murderous USC stockroom clerks, everything.
This is insane, but this is wonderful. This has been such a great conversation. And again, I could talk to you all day. Maybe we'll get a chance to sit down again at some point, talk about a future project. I have so much to ask you about, but thank you for your generosity with your time. And I want to remind everybody that this is on disc, and that you this is a great chance to pick up a movie, your one and only movie that you directed.
It's quite a pleasant surprise that it's even out there. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. You as well. I'll talk to you later. Okay. Bye-bye.